introductions, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, my name is Jim Hill. I'm an advisor for Iowa Alpha. I've been an advisor since 1978, I guess, so it's been a long time. I was chief advisor and really the only active advisor for a number of years. Currently, I'm a district director for District 11. And I have a BS from Stanford, PhD from Washington. I've had postdocs and all kinds of visiting appointments, and you can read this in my biographical sketch. I really think that advisors are the key to success of the chapter, and so I want to stress the importance of having advisors who are experienced, and of course there's a reason for that there are more advisors on the chapter's advisory board than there are officers, and so the advisors really provide the continuity because they have at least 4-year terms of at least 4 years, whereas the student officers are only around for a year or two. So I have 2 words of advice for new advisors, which I think is important for the success of a chapter. And that is, the 2 words are be there. So I think it's very important for advisors to be there and basically associate with their chapters, because the chapter officers, they feel that it's an important endeavor that they are involved with, if it's important for advisors to be there as well. So I think that's the main thing that's a key to chapter success. There are lots of other things, or different advisor styles, and I'm not going to get into that now, maybe a little bit later on. But originally, when we were soliciting participants for this forum, we were trying to arrange for a panel whose members I felt may have different styles. And I remember a former president of Tau Beta Pi really liked my style, and I didn't know I had a style. And so he tried to mimic me. He eventually became president of Tau Beta Pi. But so I don't know that I have a style, but I think there are different styles out there, and maybe we can discuss that a little bit later. Okay, I think that's enough for me. Should we go on to number 2, which is Laverne?
Hi, Laverne Fadley. I am the chief advisor for Iowa Alpha. I got my undergraduate degree here at Iowa State in 1967. But contrary to many of you who have been a long-term advisor, after I graduated from Iowa State, I went to Michigan State to get a PhD, and then spent 30 years in Rome, Italy, working for the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. So I moved back to Ames in 2004, and I have 3 children who have engineering degrees from Iowa State. The 2 that are also Tau Beta Pi members, when I moved back, suggested that since I had nothing to do, I should become an advisor, which I did in 2005, and in 2011 became the chief advisor. I am probably one of those advisors that are fairly hands-on. I try to attend as many meetings as I can, attend all the events, and fairly closely monitor report deadlines and other things for the chapter. So I think that's enough for me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laverne. So we'll move on then to Sally. If you want to give an introduction, please.
Sure. I'm probably unique in this group. I was actually initiated into Sigma Tau.
Oh.
And became a member of Tau Beta Pi when I returned back to the University of Wyoming, and they were catching up on all of their former Sigma Tau initiates to become Tau Beta Pi members. So I forget. I was initiated into Tau Beta Pi in the 90s. Well, actually, it must have been 80s because I've been an advisor since 85. So my other claim, I was at the University of Wyoming as an advisor for 17 years, and now I've been at the University of South Alabama for another 17 years. So total and half in there, whatever. I've been an advisor for 35 years. So I'm like James, that I've been around for a long time. I'm also director of fellowships. So some of you may recognize my name from the director of fellowships. And if you want to talk about advising styles, I'm kind of like Laverne. I'm pretty hands-on. And my advice is to carry on from what Jim said, is be there, but the fun part about advising is getting to know these awesome students. And if you're not there, you never get to meet the students. So, I feel like I have 35 years worth of friends, and we just had lunch with one that graduated 25 years ago, a few days ago. So friendships for life, Taubates for life.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Sally. And then our last panelist introduction will be Kurt. You want to go ahead and give an introduction?
Yep. So like the others, I'm a little different. Each of us, I'm sure, has our unique story. I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1995, and I retired from active duty in the Air Force in 2016. For about 8 years, I was teaching at the Air Force Academy, but I wasn't actually inducted. I wasn't initiated into Tau Beta Pi until 2011. And so, or at least I guess it was before that. That was my graduating class for my PhD. So all those years I struggled to get my GPA to even be close to qualifying. And then later in my career, I finally made it. But I served while I was working on my PhD, I served as vice president for the student chapter there at the Air Force Institute of Technology. And I went from there to the Air Force Academy for a second tour and immediately stepped into the advisor role. And the chapter was in pretty bad sorts. And so we did a lot of revitalizing there for about 5 years. Then I retired and came to Oklahoma State University, and it was even worse situation. In fact, their advisor was not a member of Tau Beta Pi, which was really awkward. It was considered like a secondary duty for somebody on the dean's staff. And so he really didn't know anything about it. And the chapter had gone into a deficit, a big deficit budget-wise. And they really had no idea what they were supposed to be doing. And so we basically built from the ground up. And we're a pretty thriving chapter now. And I would say that maybe instead of thinking about a style that I have, I sort of adjust to the group of student officers that I have at that moment. So I started with a student who took lots of initiative, and all I had to do was just offer little bits of knowledge, like, hey, this is how you do this is how you do that. But there have been some years when the students don't have a lot of initiative. And so I've got to kind of be a little bit more involved, a little bit. What I do is at the beginning of every semester, I sit down with them and we go over our goals. And so, I could tell right away if they set the goals and everything's great, but then for a couple of weeks, I don't hear from them, then I know that it's time to kind of like touch back and just make sure that everything is on track. So I sort of adjust myself as needed. It has been interesting to compare what it's like at a civilian university versus a military academy. I'll say that's very different dynamic.
Well, great.
I hope I'm coming through okay too. My internet's a little bit clunky here out in the rural setting.
The audio seems to be coming through fine. For me, the video is a little bit delayed.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. We can still see your face. All right. Well, great. Thank you for the introductions, everyone. Want to open it up to questions. I think the idea here is just to kind of learn everyone's style, as Jim mentioned. So we got a little bit of diversity there. and just to kind of ask any questions you have around sort of best practices or getting started if you're a new advisor. Just anything that you want to kind of learn from folks that have some potentially more experience in seat, or just kind of best practices for anything that you might be having challenges with. So we can open it up to questions now through the chat, or if you want to just go ahead and ask them.
Are folks aware that that Sally's actually got some sort of best practices PowerPoint thing? I've seen that before out on the website, Child Beta Pi website, if it's still there. But that's also a great resource for advisors.
Thanks, Kurt, for the little plug, because I was going to mention a little bit later, there is a whole website for advisors. So if you're new, you should check it out, because there's a lot of information there, probably that you're not going to read in one setting, but lots of other documents as well that will help you in your role as an advisor.
The link for that, Sally, is that something you might be able to share in the chat that we can, maybe Tanya can pop up on this slide deck that we're showing, so we can have that to record?
If you just go to the main page and you hit the member tab, one of the tabs across the top says advisors, or somewhere it's officers, one of them says advisors. So it's right on the main page.
Okay, that's good to know. Well, this will be recorded, so we'll have that information, so great.
I'll find it and get it put up.
Okay.
And another thing that's useful, Kurt, is if you are a new advisor and you don't have a password, a username and a password for the reports and officer part, you need to request one from the national office so that you can look at the reports that the students are supposed to be filing or statistics for your chapter. And all of that is available from the national organization.
Right. That's one of those things that I like to point out to the students too, is that what I do is at the beginning of each semester, and Sandy, you were asking what's the biggest adjustment to being an advisor. I think one of the things for me is making sure that the continuity is there, and also that everybody is, you kind of making sure that everybody understands what their role is. And so I've got this little Excel sheet that I do that I populate with my own deadlines. And those are things that I didn't see or think about as much as a student as I do as an advisor. But then I compare that to what I see online for what our students owe for reports and actions and whatnot. And so I add a little bit more visibility of the big picture than what I had as a student.
I'd like to bring up a couple of issues here having to do with, well, part of it has to do with the relationship between the advisor and the administration. And it's always good if one of your advisors is a dean or an associate dean, so has some ties to the administration. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is, of course, it adds a lot of credibility for the students, and the other thing is that the other advisors who may be faculty members, then they have someone who basically helps to oversee them, to help evaluate them. But usually a faculty member who is an advisor does not report to the dean. Reports to a department head or a department chair. And so I have had department chairs say, I'm wasting my time being an advisor for a group that does not really belong in the department, especially when an untenured faculty member or a faculty member who is interested in promotion up the ranks is under pressure to bring in 3 to 4 times their annual salary each year for research funds. And so I know of faculty members at some schools, even though you're supposed to spend like 40% of your time on teaching, 40% on research, 20% on service, they spend 90% of their time writing research proposals because the success rate for winning these is only about 3 or 4%. So it's very difficult for untenured faculty member to have time as an advisor to really do a good job as advisor, but yet I think the student members of a chapter really like to have young advisors that is, you know, closer to them in age so they can relate to them better than old fogies like me. So that's kind of an unfortunate situation. I wish there was a way of improving that situation.
Well,
But Iowa Alpha, we've
Jim, that's my
policy to have one of our advisors be the dean of engineering, and it's worked that way. They may or may not come to meetings, but it's still helpful, I think.
Oh, you can get younger advisors by
that's
looking at
my
alumni in
problem.
industry.
Pardon me?
But you can get younger advisors by looking not necessarily at faculty, but at alumni in industry. I'm just putting that plug out there.
Oh, that's right. Well, we have, for example, the chief advisor for my chapter, Iowa Alpha, is Laverne. And he's retired from government, or from international government.
So we've got a couple questions in the chat.
I was about to kind of point that out. So, well, first off, let me just say that. So I'm a tenure track faculty now, which is really funny with all my gray hair. I'm an older guy that's on tenure track. And what I do is I haven't compromised on my role as an advisor. I've gotten creative on my role as a research advisor. So I lean on my research students to write a lot of my grant stuff, do first drafts and things like that. So I lean on my RAs quite a bit to help me with that. Same thing with my TAs. And the more I've done that, the more it's freed me up to be able to do stuff like Tau Beta Pi. I've also asked industry folks to help with that. And one of the issues I get there is basically the same thing that Jim, that you're talking about. They're working so hard in their jobs that they don't have a lot of bandwidth either, a lot of them. But you know, there's always somebody out there. You were asking, Scott, you were asking about how we've changed our advising style due to COVID. We've had to do a lot more online. So last semester we did online initiation. We do online informational meetings. You know, when someone gets an invite, we want to make sure we have an informational meeting. But the basic rubrics, the basic procedures are all still kind of there. They just slightly different version with an online twist.
What I'd like to add is that I've noticed our attendance, particularly at meetings, has gone up. And I find that really interesting because prior to COVID, we fed them at every meeting, and you would think food would draw these students, but now that they can join from home, or some of them are even in the building, we're probably about 1/4 in person and 3/4 Zoom classes. They might be upstairs in a room and they'll join the meeting from upstairs rather than, I mean, we can't congregate as a group of more than 10 people. So I think it's actually helped in some ways. It's easier for them to reach out to us if they need you because you're more available when they need you rather than hunting you down in your office. So there are some good things that I hope we maintain out of this.
Okay.
I think one of the other things is getting outside involvement too. We can get outside involvement easier. Having industry participate with our student chapter when they can just dial in from work is much more convenient for them. So that's been another plus.
So I'm going to jump to the chat real quick. We had a couple, I think we got 3 total questions on here, but you've addressed one of them with the COVID comments. So our first question we had for the panel on here was, what would you say is the biggest adjustment a new advisor has to make if they have prior experience as a student officer?
I frankly don't have that experience because I was gone 12 years.
Well, that's exactly what I did. I went from being vice president to being an advisor. And the thing you have to remember is, as an advisor, you're not an officer anymore. You're not the one who's supposed to be doing this stuff. And so it was not just a matter of leaning on the students, but delegating. And now my philosophy might be a little different here, but even letting them fail. So I tell my guys, while I would love you to get some of these big chapter awards, I also feel like it's an achievement that you should earn, and you'll feel better about it. And so I just kind of come rescue them when they get too far behind. But as a student officer, I was much more engaged as my personality. So that was a difference.
Could I make a comment? Richard Smith, Iowa Alpha. I was never a chapter officer because I was initiated as a grad student and really didn't do anything very much. But what I'd say is one learns that Toby to Pi is very bureaucratic, and you need to learn about people like Rebecca on the headquarters staff. If you have any questions, get on the telephone and ask.
I think I would add on to what you said, Kurt, about your student officers, particularly if they're student officers and becoming advisors. And then even if they aren't just as student officers, it's, you know, most of us are used to taking charge. And I see that every year with most of the officers. They want to do it all. And they haven't learned delegation yet. And I think that's one of the best lessons that you can teach them, is that they need to involve all of the chapter members, not just the officers, and they are not personally responsible for every event or activity. So, you know, you get more of the chapter involved, I think is a more successful model for your chapters.
It helps me that I get good intelligence from the students. So usually the outgoing president, as they're getting ready to graduate, I pull them aside and I'm like, what am I going to be looking forward to with these new officers coming up? What can you tell me? And they'll say something like, oh, they're a really friendly person. Everybody likes them, but you might need to kind of follow them, keep track of them a little bit. Or they'll say, oh, they got tons of energy, but they're going to run off and chase squirrels if you don't give them a little bit of guidance here and there. So it's good to get that intel from the students.
All right, so another question we had for the panel was, do all of your chapters have at least 4 advisors, and how many are non-faculty, and what roles do the other advisors play? So a couple questions in one there.
I can comment upon Iowa Alpha. We have 7 advisors, and including Jim and Richard, but and the dean. The dean is not active, but one of the things about this is we try to also involve some faculty. We have one faculty member who's the new winner of the Advisor of the Year Award, Amy Kalita. And she is our lifeblood of the chapter from the standpoint that she was initially chief advisor for a time, but she had small children and said, I can work during the office hours, but outside of that, I have to take care of my family. So she is the person that would sign all the things for money, check that everything is correct. A few years ago, she was also given responsibility for identifying eligible students, and that was delegated from the college to her to do. So We also have one advisor who we're sort of grooming to take over leadership at one point. He was a member, he was active as a graduate student, but when he became a faculty member and without tenure, we said, we want you, but we don't want you until we can actually use you more effectively. He is now has tenure and is becoming more active on our behalf.
I'd like to amplify on that a little bit. Same chapter, but I resigned as chief advisor in about, I think, 1992, something like that. After being a chief advisor for a number of years, I felt that we were doing a good job of developing student leaders, but we needed to have training of advisors. And so I felt that the advisors should rotate into roles of responsibility, so that it was a way of keeping advisors engaged in the chapter activities. And I think that's worked out pretty well over the years. But generally, at least my style is to kind of let the students do their own thing. We give them ideas, remind them of deadlines and this sort of thing. But they are responsible for the reports and for the success of the chapter. Sometimes it doesn't work out and they make mistakes and maybe get on headquarters list of bad actors occasionally. But overall, I think it works pretty well.
I want to add a brief comment about not being a faculty member and being an advisor. The university does not recognize the advisor unless they're a faculty member. And when I retired, I immediately found I couldn't sign any financial documents. So having people from outside or from alumni chapter, I think is an excellent idea. But Laverne would probably indicate that there are some problems. That's why Amy has been so valuable to the chapter.
I'd just like to say that I think one of the important things for your chapter is to have visibility in the college as well as the campus. And several of you have hit on having the dean on your advisory team, at least have them as a member of Tau Beta Pi. If they haven't already been initiated, initiate them as an eminent engineer, so that you have that visibility with administration. But we only have 4 departments at South Alabama. We're a relatively small school. So we have an advisor in each department. And I think that really helps because they're directly connected with those students. And when they get the invitation to join Tau Beta Pi, they know somebody that can talk to them about the benefits, and that they're not just saying, oh, this is another honor society, and why am I paying X number of dollars for what are my benefits? So the advisors in the department who've had them in class say, here are the benefits, and this is why you should be joining Tau Beta Pi.
I'd like to ask the faculty advisors kind of what are the career motivating, so as a professional engineer out in the workforce, I'm a big motivator, and the reason why my company supports me is I stay connected with our local universities, and so when we need staff, I have a direct pathway into the university through my advising role. So I get a lot of support from my company for putting in the work that being an advisor is. What are some of the motivators for faculty members that help, that is in their career path? Because I find faculty members are quick for, when I approach them to be an advisor, say yeah I'll be an advisor, but they're not really interested in engaging the students beyond that point.
If you're at a research
I'd like to answer that one.
If you're at a research institution or even a wannabe research institution, and the faculty are in tenure track or tenure faculty positions, there's 0.
Okay.
We have a 5% whatever service category, but I think Sandy pointed out in the chat, it means next to nothing. If we don't do any service, we'll still get tenured. But there's an interesting trend in institutions across the United States. And I think we're going to see more and more of it, that institutions are hiring teaching faculty that are going to have higher teaching loads, and they have a service component. And I think those are the people, first of all, they're taking on those teaching responsibilities because they have the right intents. They want to interact with students. So I think those are the people that we can start looking at in a lot of our institutions. I know we have about 8 of them on our faculty.
Okay. Somebody else had.
I'd like to talk for a moment.
We have quite a few also, and we used to call them lecturers, and but now we've given them faculty titles, but we have like professors of practice now, and actually ASEE is their main participants now are faculty members, quote, of practice, unquote, and they're also professors of research. And these are non-tenure track positions, and they depend on raising soft money, research money for grants in order to stay employed.
So I think, David, to answer your question, there's going to be a bigger pool of people that are associated with the university. So it won't be as difficult as it has been at some of these institutions.
Okay. So I'd like to chime in on this too. I've learned a different approach here in the last 2 years. Rather than asking industry to be involved as directly as an advisor role in Tau Beta Pi, instead, what they are interested in and what their company is interested in is having access to the students, to have a pipeline to the student talent, that whether it be through internships or sponsoring undergraduate capstone research, capstone design activities. And so what they'll do is they will provide gift funds to faculty mentors who are mentoring in the research, and they'll get some interaction with the team there, but that limits them directly to that team. But through our university foundation, I then connect them to, say, an evening where they can sponsor a dinner meeting and have an opportunity to talk to the entire Tau Beta Pi student membership. So now they're getting a select group, and I find lots of support that way. And it really helps if there is somebody at that industry who is a Tau Beta, because now they can talk to them about the value not only of their industry, but also the value of being a Tau Beta in industry.
We have a lot of Tau Betas who have gone into industry and they come back to recruit at a career fair. And of course, they are very interested in hiring members of our chapter. In fact, over the last few weeks, they have had virtual meetings with members of our chapter. So, several large companies have done this.
That's something else.
I think there's a definitely mutual relationship.
I would add one thing to what Jim has just said is I think one of the activities most chapters have is bringing in speakers, and then you get your interaction with industry and the chapter.
Right, and you bring them to the Design Expo at the end of the semester, and they can see not only how how the students have performed on a project that they're related to, but also look at the other students around the expo and see what sort of things is happening at the campus. So there really is a nice interaction there.
We've had some recruiters from a nearby very large company. Actually, there are a lot of fairly large companies near us in the upper Midwest. And they'll interview Tau Betas because that's who they want to hire. But their questions aren't just about the students. They're interested in what they did for Tau Beta Pi. How active were they in the chapter? Because they were active themselves when they were members. So that's something we try to impress on our own members. There's a good reason to stay active as students.
Scott asked earlier about how things have changed with COVID. And one of the things I think of an opportunity is that we have K-12 systems reaching out to us because their students need activities as well. They're virtual. And so we've been able to interact with some of those programs that we've done in the past now that are virtual. And I think that's an opportunity for our chapters to think about creatively how they can do that. We have our chapters right now developing demonstrations, demo kits, demonstrations, virtual that can be taken into a K-6 classroom. And the teacher can either do it or the student can host the video in that classroom. So I think, we need to be creative about what we're doing. And these are the things I said. I think we can keep them beyond when we're back in the classroom. I think there's going to be some very good things we've taken out of COVID. Certainly the virtual contact is, I think, advantageous. And I second Kurt with the industry. It's so much easier to get them to speak, even, they're 15 minutes away from our campus, but if they can Zoom in, they're much happier to do that.
Yesterday and today, there were 3 special ICE sessions in 7 chapters. We're discussing videos, and Iowa Alpha was one of the 7. I don't remember who the others are. But there were 7 chapters that had submitted YouTube videos that described their activities and how they coped with COVID. And those are all worth seeing. Some of the activities are the same, or pretty much the same, but some are different. So it's worth going back and taking a look at those videos.
We at our chapter, I approached the dean staff and said, normally we would want to get together in person for back to school kind of stuff. But I asked what the dean had as a priority. How could the students support the dean? And the concern was that students generally had maybe 1 or 2 masks, but that they're supposed to be washing them regularly, like every day even. And so we talked to the local alumni chapter, and they donated funds to procure a whole bunch of masks for the students to distribute, and just to all engineering students. And so on one hand, we were promoting the dean's, we even had billboards up, we were promoting the dean's message of wash masks regularly, and they were marked with the Tau Beta Pi logos, so it improved the campus imagery as well, and it gave the advisor or the alumni an opportunity to engage with the students in a tangible way. So it was kind of a win-win-win, and all of that under this whole COVID thing. The trick was you couldn't have people lining up to get the masks. So our students would catch students as they were passing by, and it worked out quite well. We were able to hand out like all of our masks in a matter of like 30 minutes.
Good.
So we've got a question in the chat here. How much involvement do you have with industry advisors? Are they at the beginning of your advisory meeting? And what would you say are the weights of their responsibilities?
So I want to make sure I go on record to say that I'm not opposed to having an industry advisor, by the way. We don't have any at our chapter, but I can see that if I was in a pinch, I would absolutely love to have an industry advisor, because students want that connection to something outside the university, where they're headed. But I've not had a need personally or I've not had an experience of working with an industry advisor.
So, I could a little bit, because I am an industry advisor, but I started as a graduate student advisor, and then went out into industry and just stayed affiliated with the chapter after. I I'm not listed as the chief advisor because of, just logistics of getting stuff signed and everything, but I pretty much function as the chief advisor most of the time. So I think that it really just depends on the willingness of the advisor team to step up. Like if I could be less active, I would, but faculty members tend not to engage. So I remain kind of committed, So I think that's the answer that I would give.
That's absolutely right. I've seen that. I've seen that. We're looking at a panel of really great advisors, but you could just as easily put together a panel of really lousy advisors who get the task of being advisor kind of almost against their will. And when they're disenfranchised or they're disengaged, whatever it may be, then yeah, someone from industry jumping in is like a godsend.
I found that having the students, when we have somebody leave that was an advisor in one of our departments, the students usually are fairly quick to step up and ask a particular individual because they've worked well with the students. And if they're not a member, as I think somebody said that they had a advisory, the chapter didn't even have the person that was an advisor wasn't a member, which you need to be if you're an advisor for the chapter. You can initiate them. There's no reason that you can't initiate somebody from your faculty, and which is a good thing because again, that's visibility. If the faculty are behind Tau Beta Pi, they will encourage their students to join Tau Beta Pi. So, I just, look at your faculty and there are people that want to work with students. That's why they're faculty members. I don't think we touched on last night. Somebody brought up executive meetings, the advisory board meetings. And I really think those are important. Sometimes the students aren't really excited about yet another meeting, but that's a place that advisors can be very effective in developing leadership skills amongst the officers, because it's a less, it's a friendlier environment for them to try out their skills and deal with how they're going to manage a much smaller group. And so encourage your students to have advisory board meetings regularly. We have one between every one of our chapter meetings.
So for us, our advisory board meets at the very beginning of each semester and more or less looks at things like finance, programs that the students want to undertake. And then we generally follow up in the fall semester with a meeting with the dean about 1 to 2 weeks after that advisory board meeting. But I agree, advisory board meetings are very important. And essentially, we use them to set sort of the agenda and concerns for the semester.
So Leonard, you asked about how do you handle succession of the chief advisor role? And I'm kind of curious from the other panelists. Once I stepped into the chief advisor role, it was kind of like the mafia, right? Once I got in, I can't get out. Not that I want to. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy it, but I've not had to worry about planning succession because I just kind of keep doing it. I do try to find succession in the other department faculty advisors, but they're kind of in the same pickle. They once they got into that job, they kind of get it for a long tenure. But and then the question was about like what sort of topics come up at that advisory board meeting. And I will say, while I may not talk about succession, one of the things that we talk about is what unique goal does the chapter want to achieve that semester? Because the reports and all that stuff is sort of like your basic block and tackle, right? But it's sort of like if you want to make the chapter grow and be successful, you got to constantly be looking for ways to make improvements. So when I first got to OSU, they didn't even have a event. Sally, they had the white pyramid with the big iron, girder going through it. And I was like, holy cow, this is a Sigma Tau University. And I kept asking around, I had to ask around, where's the Tau Beta Pi bent? And they're like, well, I think we may have destroyed that or put it in some museum somewhere. And they were talking about all kinds of other things, but they were confused. They had never even seen the Tau Beta Pi bent. And so we told the students, like, let's go to industry and find someone who would donate. And so we found a foundry that was willing to actually donate funds in the end to do that. And then the next year it was like, well, we got to make a base for it. Who's going to make a base? And so civil engineers made a base for it. And then it's like, now we need to put a plate on it. So it's like each year we just kind of successfully made little iterations on that. And then, they would usually have something else actually beyond that. But that's what I like to talk about, the advisory board, is kind of like, what are you going to do beyond just your basic functions?
I know somebody, Kurt, you said, do they meet regularly with student officers? And I should have said, we meet twice a month as an advisory board and twice a month as a chapter.
I was responding to the question about the, was it Tanya, that they have 8 to 12 advisors at any one time, and all of them are alumni except for Tanya. And so my question was, how often do the industry advisors engage with the students? Is that something that they do regularly, or are they kind of like advisor in name only? Or, I mean, how engaged are they? I'd like to ask. It's weird for a panelist to ask the audience, but that's a question I would have.
Most of them are actually fairly recent alum. There's usually 2 or 3 people who, as they graduate, become advisors. So they actually stay pretty active. They tend to attend chapter meetings, and most of them attend all of our advisor meetings.
Maybe do you have any challenges the other way, where maybe they're too assertive and they're not letting the students kind of take the reins?
Sometimes, because the past president generally is one of the people who wants to be an advisor. But our chapter is actually really solid. They do a pretty good job of running themselves. So it doesn't tend to be a huge problem. Like they'll reach out to the advisory board mostly when they're stuck or they're not sure about how to handle something. And then as a group, we kind of advise them on what we think and let them kind of run with it.
That's great that they get that buy-in though, but that they're sold.
So if I can chime in, because we've got a similar situation at Colorado Beta, that most of our advisors are industry people who were former student officers who kind of just didn't go away properly, guilty as charged. And and the thing is that it's the industry advisors are the ones who have time for the students. It's the faculty advisor who usually is the one that only maybe 1 or 2 of the student officers has ever even met. And they're the ones that we have difficulty getting to any sort of meetings, especially because, a faculty member wants that meeting to be during the day, during their work hours, and industry people are like, well, I have a job, I have to work. So we have to come up with asynchronous methods of involving them, or the faculty member just ends up not involved, which is always a challenge.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on that whole, because that's kind of the question I asked to Sally before. And, Sally's obviously a very active faculty member. So I guess as a industry person trying to, where do you see that synchronicity occurring with faculty members?
Can you ask that again?
So I guess, what I heard, and I'm trying to remember who was just speaking here, but, we were discussing the fact that industry people like to have, a meeting after work when the students are also out of classes. Faculty members would like to have their meetings with their students during office hours. So it's like multiple different circles trying to Venn diagram together. And I guess looking for, and the commentary that faculty advisors don't have the time to do it. And, I feel like, as an industry person, it's like, I don't have time either, but I make it. I guess what are the motivators for the faculty members and how to make that synchronicity occur? Like if you have industry people that are willing to make the time, how to motivate those faculty members as well.
I'll be honest with you, I have harder time having meetings, advisory board meetings during the day than I do in the evenings, because the student schedules don't line up, especially when you talk about student officers that are from different departments. And so we generally have our advisory board meetings around 5 or so, 5:30. So really there's very little excuse for anybody not to be able to make it. But the trick is letting people know far enough in advance. And so communication, I think, is kind of helpful to facilitate that. But David, I know exactly what you're talking about. Again, every university I've stepped into as an advisor, it's been because there's been faculty there that are just, it was sort of put upon them and they just weren't engaged. And so it's kind of hard to light a fire that isn't already there, I was fortunate to come straight out of being a student officer. So I still had that kind of that passion for it. I understood the mission, how important the mission was. But for someone who maybe just was inducted, they were initiated some time ago in the past, and then they're on faculty and you're like, oh, you're a Taubate. Why don't you take this? It's like, what do you do? It's really tough to reach out to those folks.
Comment before we leave, and it's a repeat of last night, but if we've got any new advisors, one thing that's been really successful with me is at the beginning of the year, and somebody mentioned it here, we do a cookout at our house for the officers, and it's their planning meeting for the year, and they all come because my husband cooks. So it's a great time to get them together in a social environment, but they plan their year. And I think it's really important. They get to know each other. They get to know the advisors. The advisors all come in a fairly laid back setting. And I encourage you to do that with your chapters. Those of you that are new, and even those of you that have been around for years and aren't doing it.
I would say that's the single best piece of advice. There's lots of good advice out there, but that's the best piece.
Nice.
All right, and we've got a couple minutes left in this session, and just to make sure that we announce it before the session ends, there's an advisor roundtable discussion, if you haven't seen, and that is on Saturday, October 31st from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern time. So I just want to make everyone aware that that's going to be going on to continue these conversations, as well as others around the advisor position. Since we've got another couple minutes, if we have any final questions or thoughts, we'll go ahead and share those, and then this will be up and recorded and stored so that others can view it in the future.
I have one question, people can come to it quickly, is how important is geographic proximity for having a industry advisor? Our chapter is far, far away from almost any industry.
Hi, I'm
not necessary at all. You could be in a totally different state.
Yeah, one of my chapters is over 12,000 miles away. So,
okay.
And honestly, with all the new online stuff, I would imagine that's even more facilitable. You can facilitate that more than ever.
Yep.
Yeah, I was beginning to think that, rethink what I had thought last year.
Yeah, I think geographic proximity is going to have less and less importance going forward.
I got a quick question for the panel. Do you do anything in particular to try and go after that part of the Tau Beta Pi about fostering a, fostering spirit, liberal,
Culture.
I'm tongue-tied, the liberal spirit, liberal culture, that's it, liberal culture. Mhm. Fostering a spirit of liberal culture. Got it.
One of our officers last year was also a voice major. And we were all going to go to the opera last spring, but that happened after the shutdown. But, you know, you can support your members' activities that way. And I'm sure you've got some students that are in liberal culture.
Well, I try to encourage them to nominate for the laureate, but I don't know if that's really all that effective.
Yeah, we also try to identify students we can nominate for laureate awards.
It's funny when I've done that, we've gotten I've been able to find lots and lots of members that are athletes, musicians, and that sort of thing. And but I haven't really followed up well on that. So yeah.
I would say the laureate award is the most difficult to actually nominate, because it takes an awful lot of work. And generally, I am personally involved in that because the students just don't have the time to devote to responding to all of the requirements and documents that they expect to have submitted.
I was successful to get one laureate through when I was at the Air Force Academy, and he was a boxer and a skydiver. Like, where do you put that person?
Our most recent laureate was a power lifter, so.
I know you're talking about.
Category
I remember her at the
for
last
varied
convention.
skills is for.
Yeah, there was the diverse achievements, right, or something like that. Yeah.
All right, everyone. So we
I'll tell you
are
what-
at. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I've got to go. My family's like knocking on my door.
So yeah, so we're at time for this session. A couple other reminders. So we've got Advisor ICE next Wednesday and Thursday if you want to check on Whova for more information. And you can go ahead and sign up on Whova, add it to your agenda as a reminder. And then if you could go into Whova and rate this session, add any comments about it, just letting us know about your experience. But we're going to call it for this one. So we'll continue the discussion in the other sessions. But thank you, everyone, for coming, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Sally, are you still there?
Yes,
I haven't seen anything about Bob Efimba. Is he participating in the virtual convention? Do you know?
I don't know. I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
He registered and he was in the D4 meeting, but I think I might start sending him the links if he's not in Whova, if anybody wants to do that too. I've been sending the links every morning. I'm the announcements person with the bad spelling, so apologies. So I'll start sending it. And oh, Sally, I also wanted to thank you. I see you're volunteering on the panel. You're also a speaker. You're also speaking at the EC meeting. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, attendees.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Laverne. See you guys later. Thanks, Kurt.
Okay, bye.